super applicable to fish. We go with the flow all the time. And I'm going to talk today about some of the resilience to the things, some of the challenges that we're facing this year. I want to start off by acknowledging that Grand Canyon is the homeland for 11 traditionally associated tribes. And also that a lot of the work that we do to protect native species in the canyon involves the taking of life in a place that is very sacred. And so we don't take that lightly. We have spent a lot of time consulting with tribes to figure out ways that we can mitigate some of those activities. And so one of the main ways that we've done that is through beneficial use. So we take the fish that we do remove from the canyon, we prepare by cleaning them, vacuum sealing them, freezing them, flying them out, distributing them to tribal communities and to public interested folks as well. When those fish are too small for that, we have also provided them for ceremonial aviaries on tribal communities and at times to wildlife rehabilitation centers. Our smallmouth bass that I'm going to talk about later, at this point, we are using them for scientific studies. So those ones are not being beneficially used in the way of consumption, but we are still using them to learn about the problem that we're facing with them. Yes, is that better? Ooh, whoa. Yeah. Thanks, Helen. As we know, the river as it stands now is altered, and that those alterations have also impacted the fish species there. We're all well aware of the habitat fragmentation and habitat changes that resulted from the closure of the Glen Canyon Dam. Another big impact are the introduction of non-native and invasive fish species. And so we traditionally had 8 native fish species in the canyon. We have already lost 3 of those. The endangered Colorado pike minnow, bony-tail, and round-tailed chub are extirpated from Grand Canyon. We still are working to protect these other 5, including the threatened humpback chub and the endangered razorback sucker. But we currently find ourselves in a place where the Grand Canyon is really a stronghold for our native fishes, and it was not always the case in the past. We'll look here and we'll look here first. Humpback chub were first listed as endangered in 1967. As recently as 25 years ago, the Grand Canyon was dominated by non-native fish species. And so if you look here, this is 2003, 13, and 23. This red indicates very low percentage of native fish in fish captures. So this red is 30% or less native fish. And the blue is, 70% or greater percentage of fish capture. So you can see over time, we've started to see these natives really spread throughout the canyon. So we've got more of those now. Also in the early 2000s, we had about 5,000 humpback chub left. Now let's fast forward to now. The chub were downlisted to threatened in 2021. And that was a lot because of the population that we have in Grand Canyon right now. Approximately 95% of the world's population of chub are in Grand Canyon. And Western Grand Canyon is just this amazing, almost fairy tale story where beginning in around 2014, we started to see a lot of humpback chub showing up in Western Grand Canyon. We have estimates right now of about 75,000 humpback chub in Western Grand Canyon, plus or minus. So, we came from a place where we thought we had 5,000, and now we have a number that I never really thought I would ever say. So, yeah, we're in a really good place. And as we heard yesterday and for a long time before that, things are changing. And one of the biggest impacts is the aridification that we've seen over the last 20 or so years. I won't go into that since we talked about it yesterday. Today, I'm going to focus on a couple of areas where we can demonstrate the resilience in fisheries. And one of those is the smallmouth bass eradication efforts, which are taking place mostly in the upper canyon, so right below Glen Canyon Dam, and mostly in the first 8 miles of Grand Canyon. And then talk a little bit about some of the post-Dragon Fire impacts that we've seen so far. When in 2022, we saw the first evidence of smallmouth bass reproduction in below Glen Canyon Dam. And at the time, we really kind of circled up with our agency partners, also with our upper basin colleagues, to try to figure out how we were gonna approach this. The upper basin folks have been dealing with a smallmouth bass invasion for the past 20 years, and so we've been able to learn a lot from them. And we talked about this yesterday, and I'm just going to give you a little graphical look at what is happening. So as lake levels have declined, this warmer water level that includes some of these warm water invasive fish species has actually come into contact with the penstock areas of the dam, allowing those warm water invasive fish species to actually pass through the dam and make it into the river below. And at the same time, the river below is warmer, right? We're passing warmer water through. We've got a warmer river down below that is conducive for smallmouth bass reproduction and establishment. And the stakes are really high. Why does this matter? This matters because particularly what we have seen in the upper basin, so the areas above Glen Canyon Dam, they have been fighting smallmouth bass for about 20 years. And in that time period, we've seen dramatic decreases, in our native fish species. And so you can see here, as smallmouth bass removals have increased, we've seen declines in our Colorado pike minnow captures, or population estimates there. That's an endangered fish that we've lost from this system. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2018 said that smallmouth bass present the highest potential impacts to humpback chub. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about this invasion curve. We spent a lot of time thinking about this. And just briefly, we have area of infestation plotted against time. And then this is money spent for control efforts. And basically we want to stay here in prevention. We ideally don't want to ever have to deal with this problem. We've passed that. We have a problem. What this tells us is that early on, when we have small groups of localized smallmouth bass, for instance, we can work towards eradication. We can work towards actually removing those from the system. As time goes on, though, and these fish get to be more in number and more spread out throughout time, we're going to lose the opportunity to get rid of these fish, so that we end up in a place where we're just going to try to contain them if we get there and keep them from spreading to other places. If we're not able to do that, we really start to see this exponential growth and spread of the species and get to a place where the only option that we have is long-term management. So that is putting us up here in the very costly end of things. And as my friend Tilden Jones in the Upper Basin says, they are currently on a treadmill of failure that costs millions and millions of dollars every year. And what they're trying to do now is knock back smallmouth bass for periods of time that allow our native fish to have a good year here and there. And the smallmouth bass are going to come back and they're going to do that again. And so that's what we don't want to do here. This is what we're learning from. I won't go into this too much, but we got together with all our agency partners and friends and came up with 6 metrics that we would measure to try to learn about this smallmouth bass invasion and to help answer some questions. And so we're looking at these main things, and we're feeding that into some smallmouth bass modeling that GCMRC is doing. And we're also taking a multi-strategy response. We realize that there is not one thing that we can do that is going to help us eradicate this population. And so one of the first things that we spent some time on is addressing known spawning sites. There's one place below Glen Canyon Dam where we have seen spawning of smallmouth bass, and that was in the negative 12-mile slough up in Glen Canyon. That we were actually, Glen Canyon and the Bureau of Reclamation were able in 2025 to actually restore that system so that they actually notched open this area, and it is now returned to a free-flowing state. So we've got river water running through that that is cooler and has higher velocity, and so we've made that unsuitable for smallmouth bass spawning. We need to address entrainment. If we keep having fish coming through the dam, we are not going to be able to get rid of smallmouth bass. The Park Service, we've really taken the lead on early detection, surveillance, and on removing the fish as we see them. And then lastly, we need to be able to control temperature. and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We have some good news. In the first few years of this project, we have seen some good results. Captures of smallmouth bass have decreased significantly. And we have seen that also with green sunfish, which is another high risk invasive warm water fish species. Here we have the year, the number of captures in the main stem, the slew when it existed, and then the total. We have seen no evidence of reproduction in 2024 and 2025. Most of the fish are still located in the Least Ferry section. We have very few downstream into the Grand Canyon. The lowest downstream capture we have seen so far is around River Mile 16. That was a fish picked up in 2023. We also do some environmental DNA sampling to try to aid in our surveillance, and the lowest detections have been around River Mile 39. And so they've been very few. That tells us that we have a small number of smallmouth bass in the Grand Canyon area, probably spread out from one another, which is a good thing. And the growth that we've seen in the smallmouth bass has been relatively slow. And I'll just point out these heat density maps from 2023, 24, and 25. Red and yellow is very dense. Blue is less so. And so I'll point out this yellow was the slew. And over time, we've really seen that density decrease. Why are we seeing these good results? Number one, cool mix has been incredibly successful. The cool mix releases that folks talked about yesterday, temperature is a really important driver of smallmouth bass. It has indications for hatch date of the fish. It has indications for their growth, and all of this leads into whether or not they will survive winter. So when the winter temperatures hit, some of these, especially smaller fish, don't survive. And so if we can kind of push back, we'll ideally have no reproduction, but if we're pushing it back a little bit, then we're able to kind of impact survival over the winter there. The higher lake levels that we've seen the past couple of years have really helped us, have helped to prevent much entrainment. And the restoration of the negative 12-mile slew also has been really impactful. What we're hoping for is that smallmouth bass live about 8 years or so. And so with the NPS removals, with natural mortality, with stopping reproduction and stopping entrainment, we think we have a chance at eradication in the system. Bad news is that we have uncertainty about whether we can do cool mix this year or in years beyond. And that is a huge question that remains. We have low lake fowl elevations. That means we're going to see more entrainment into the system. We're expecting record high dam releases in terms of temperature. This is a reclamation modeling product that predicts temperatures coming out of the dam at 24, 26 degrees Celsius, which is unheard of. And our smallmouth bass, that when we did see reproduction in 2022 and 23, those fish are starting to get to their reproductive size. So, we're at a critical moment, as it says. We have seen success. We feel like it's in our reach, but failure is also, that's just the bottom line. I didn't know that Ed was going to put his poetry yesterday, but I was inspired by him to include some of mine. So there you are. Next, we'll talk about the Dragon Bravo fire.
Read it.
Read it. You guys can read it.
Oh.
Flows ease, warmth creeps in. Invaders rise, natives fades. River holds its breath.
Oh.
Okay, Dragon Bravo fire. I'm going to talk about fisheries impacts from that we've seen so far. We know that that fires impact fisheries. We know that post-fire runoff can degrade water quality by introducing ash, sediment, and potentially contaminants, increasing turbidity and temperature. These things can decrease dissolved oxygen in the water and impact fishes. Disturbance and altered habitat can also elevate the risk of aquatic invasive species that maybe already are there, or new ones that can enter a system. We see destabilization of habitat and stream banks that can impact fish in the long term. Fish can either be killed outright, say from a low dissolved oxygen event, or we can see sublethal effects that take some time to see, and that can include reduced growth and reproduction and recruitment to adulthood. As we know, we all go with the flow. Impacts can extend from tributaries to the main stem river as well. I'm going to go to this really quick and just point out that we saw impacts really quickly. And by we, I mean you all as well. We started to see in the fall reports of flash flooding in various tributaries, blackened water, water that smelled like smoke, ash deposition, and even in the river. There was a fish trip downstream at River Mile 207 in August or September that actually saw the wave of this black water coming down as far as there, right? And the fire impacts probably affected down to about Crystal. So that's, the magnitude of what we're seeing. And we've seen impacts to fire, to fisheries from fire just in the time that I've been here at the canyon. So in 2010, there was a fire called the Saffron Fire that burned near kind of the Shinamou watershed. And we saw reduced survival and vital rates in our translocated humpback chub from that fire. In 2014, there was another fire that burned about 10% of the Shinamou watershed. Some monsoon storms came and sat right on the burn scar after that. And subsequent debris flow and flooding wiped out all of the fish below the fire impacted area there. Few really tough speckled days poked their head somewhere and survived, but we lost humpback chub, we lost sucker, we lost non-native trout. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about Bright Angel Creek. We have worked for 15 years in Bright Angel Creek to try to remove non-native trout to benefit humpback chub and native fish in that creek, and also outside of the creek in the river. And we've seen some pretty tremendous successes during that time. We've seen at times 80% plus reduction in trout throughout the creek. We've seen 480% increase in our native fish in the creek. And we've also had times where we have seen less good news, right? Climate change related changes impact the work that we're doing and can also benefit the trout in the system. One of the problems that we have also is there's an area in the upper watershed called Angel Creek. It's really hard for us to work there. It's hard for us to remove trout there. And so that has served as basically a refill for the creek year after year. And so we've considered doing a chemical pesticide renovation in that area so that we can stop this long-term management and really restore that creek to natives. I'll also add that in the same Fish and Wildlife Service species status assessment, it was noted that humpback chub are highly vulnerable to fire-induced effects, and it was described as potential catastrophic threat to humpback chub. We got into the creek for the first time in December of last year. There had been just a pretty minor precipitation event in the watershed above there at that time. But what we saw was extensive evidence of debris flows and flooding with ash deposition, vegetation wiped out, really extensive impacts in that upper section. As I said, it was very thick with trout in that area. One of our biologists said that they were so thick that you could basically lean over and pick up a chub. I mean, there were not a chub, I wish that were true, a trout, right? There were a lot of trout up there. So our crews went up there, they did some surveillance, they did some eDNA studies also to try to look for presence and absence of trout, and they found no trout. So it went from, leaning over and picking up a trout to no trout. We don't know if this continues, right? We've been doing some sampling down in the lower part of the creek. We have seen some trout down there. We've seen some natives. And we're going to get back here in April and spend a couple of weeks up there also looking around. But what we saw on that December trip is all the way down to about Transepts Canyon, there were no trout. And there is a barrier, a natural fish barrier between where we didn't see trout and where we did. I do want to note too, there's never been native fish up there. The native fish didn't really start until Cottonwood Campground down below. So, like Emily said, there might be some hope here. There's definitely resilience in this system. And, as we started to look at the emergency response to the fire, one of our tribal partners reminded us that fire is a natural part of the landscape. We're all familiar with that here. And although it can disrupt, it can also be a balancing impact. And so we have work to do to try to figure out if there are impacts to fish, long-term impacts to fish in the whole system, I'll say. We expect to see more negative impacts over the next, who knows how many years. But, maybe the Dragon Bravo fire has helped achieve what we haven't been able to achieve. We've been working really hard for 15 years in that creek, and we've had varying levels of success. And maybe this is an opportunity that the Dragon Bravo has provided to actually really have a native fishery in Bright Angel Creek. So some hope. Oh, here's my other poetry. River carves its path, carrying stories and silt. Time flows ever new. And if you have questions, if you want to come join us sometime, reach out. Love you.
We've got time for a few questions.
Okay. Questions? Oh, Zeke, big question.
Can you tell us about reintroduction of pike minnow?
Reintroduction of pike minnow has been a long-term dream of many of us. Fish and Wildlife Service has spearheaded an effort to do a pilot study of pike minnow in Western Grand Canyon. And we've been helping with that with some funding from our Grand Canyon Conservancy partners. The plan is to, over 3 years, release 60 female-only pike minnow into Western Grand Canyon with tracking devices implanted to try to learn about how they would fare if there were impacts to other species, et cetera. And so that is still in planning phases. We were hoping to do it last October. That didn't work out. There were talks about maybe doing it this fall. And right now we just want to make sure Fish and Wildlife Service needs to make sure that they really have covered the bases, and they've done a lot of careful study to make sure that it's not expected to endanger our native fish. But they're kind of still in that process of working out that. And so stay tuned.
Let's do one more, and then if there's more questions at the break.
Okay. We should go. I'm going to go with you. Yeah. That's a good question. They're asking about if we lose pool mix and other things, what do we do? And so there are some investigations that Reclamation is doing. They've looked at nets below the dam, right? Like a catcher's mitt. That didn't work. They're looking at things like bubble curtains or thermal curtains just upstream of the dam to try to prevent the fish from coming close enough to pass through. We'll see how it's hard to scale up to Glen Canyon Dam size. So some of that technology has been used in other areas, but Glen Canyon Dam is a little bit different. We really hope that we can continue pool mix. I mean, that's my biggest plug. That's the best thing that we have available to us right now. And if we lose that opportunity, we're going to be making some really difficult decisions about the fishery.